I decided I wasn't sure how long this particular sermon would take because I'm going to do it a little differently. So I'm omitting a reading to just give us plenty of time for this part. And I would also like a special thanks to Crystal, because without her, I couldn't do the sermon this way. First of all, I want to say that if you read in your e-blast and some other things that said that the title was Being Human Together, well, that was my provisional title when Penny first asked me to fill the pulpit, and I changed my mind. And I decided to go with your overall summer theme of experience during the pandemic, and so this is Hope for Hard Times. And the other way this sermon is different is you will see photos that are both personal to my family as well as from my recent trip to the Irelands, both of them. And I have blended them into the message that I'm offering for you today. So if you are where you can see a screen, I think the message will be more meaningful to you. And at home or on Zoom, you're lucky because the image will pop up when it comes to that time. Hope for hard times. I'll give Sharon a moment to sit where she can see. And while that happens, I want to say, Tim, when you came to that last Vivaldi movement, I couldn't think, if Vivaldi had lived today and written this summer, I don't think that piece would have been more appropriate. It was exactly thunder and lightning and electricity and everything. That was great. I so appreciated that, all of the music, but that was an amazing choice for this summer. I totally agree. Thank you. The image you see now is a sculpture in a cemetery of the church in a tiny village in the Republic of Ireland called Ballyvaughan. I stayed there for a week with some friends, and it is on the rocky west coast of Ireland. Do I have folks who have been to Ireland here? Oh, look at all of you, yes. And this is on what they call the Wild Atlantic Way. Have others been on the Wild Atlantic Way, which is on the west coast? One or two, great. That's where this is. Cemeteries in Ireland are so interesting. We pretty much break to everyone we pass to stop and take a look. But this particular sculpture is not historic, but I felt immediately drawn to it. The plaque said the title was Victorious Spirit, and it was built 20 years ago. The sculpture designed 12 arches over figures in a circle, and the arches represent the barriers that we face in life. So they contain the figures. See that? The figures with arms outstretched represent the victory over barriers that the human spirit can achieve through faith and community. So the sculpture invites people not to just look at the sculpture, but to enter it, to participate with it. I slowly entered the circle, the only one in my small group to do it, not just view it from the outside. I was traveling again, I realized, after such a long time. But first, as I walked around the circle slowly, I thought about all of the barriers to joyful living I had experienced in the last several years. And before long, I wasn't at all self-conscious, and I began to twirl inside the circle and walk around with my arms outstretched, and I felt more thankful and hopeful than I had in a long time. So today, I invite you to talk with me about hope in hard times. The sculptor 20 years ago couldn't have predicted a global pandemic or any of the other turmoil, personal and political, that we have been through in recent years. The sculpture was created 4 years after the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that was signed in Ireland that ended sectarian violence. However, even in 2002, tensions were still rife, and unfortunately, they are still today, at least in some communities. I invite you now to take a moment. And even though it's difficult, think about the barriers that have contained and constrained your spirits in recent years. It doesn't take long for them to come to mind, does it? We have all experienced losses too numerous to mention. We were separated from the community from which we draw strength and support, except through technology, which has its limits. It's good, but it is limiting. And we haven't really had time, at least from my perspective, to acknowledge and grieve the losses we have suffered. Life has demanded that we move on. So my sermon today is not only about my personal story of survival through the pandemic, but as we have already taken a moment to do, to give you the opportunity to reflect on your story, while also hearing some stories about how other people have found hope in hard times. And I am hopeful that through these stories, both personal and otherwise, that you will find a few insights maybe that will help you construct a hope that feels grounded and authentic for you, and dare I say, even as the sculptor invites us, victorious. The next photo I have to show you is a very personal one. This is me hugging my mom. The first time I got to visit with her at her assisted living facility in late 2020. She had lived in assisted living for almost 4 years. She never got COVID because of the diligence of that staff in protecting her and the other residents. But it was so hard to not be able to hug her and to go out to lunch or be with her in a not personal way. So when we first got to be able to go see her, we had to be in full hazmat gear, as you can see, and I could only stay for 15 minutes. We were in a special room of the facility. And by that time, her dementia had increased so that she really didn't understand this whole pandemic thing and why things had to be the way they were. She remained her sweet self, but it was hard, very hard to be like that together. Fortunately, very fortunately, my brother and I did get to spend quality time with her, finally, during the final months of the pandemic, which turned out to be the final months of the last year of her life. She passed away in July of 2021 at the age of 94, so I'm very grateful for her 94 years. And I am very blessed to have a loving and caring brother who was my partner with caring for my mom. As many of you know, my husband also had a major health crisis in the summer of 2020. It was a very stressful time, and all of you who have dealt with care for a loved one can attest that when you are trying to navigate all the health systems, you make more phone calls than you care to think about. You have to be persistent, and you have to advocate strongly for your loved one. There are many ups and downs. So Harry now lives in memory care on Amelia Island. We found a lovely place. I'm very grateful for Lakeside at Amelia, a new facility. And I am most grateful to his younger sister, Penny, my beloved sister-in-law, and someone well known to all of you. We have gotten through this time together, haven't we, Penny? And honestly, I would be lost without her. So I think we have a photo of Penny and I at a drive-by event. The only way we could say hello to my mom was if we drove by with signs, and Penny and I made some signs, and we got to drive by and show them to my mom. And then the help took the signs and put them up in her room so she could remember that day. In addition to these two life losses, my good friend and art studio partner, Susan, was diagnosed with cancer and subsequently passed away 2 months after my mom died. She was 3 months shy of her 75th birthday, which to me is feeling younger by the minute, as well as the fact that it was far too soon to see her shining light be extinguished. In the midst of those losses, my beloved cat, age 17, had to be put down because he had cancer too. And it was the most humane thing to do. He was a big dude, probably weighed just shy of 20 pounds. He was his own man, and may I say, he was a badass cat. And at the end of this last year, at the end of 2021, a gifted musician known very well on the island, and maybe to many of you, Jane Lindberg, she used to run the Island Chamber Singers. She passed away suddenly from a heart ailment, and we were all absolutely devastated by her loss. Penny sang with the group she led. I have managed to escape getting COVID so far, knock on every piece of wood I can find. But let me tell you, dear friends, I have been pummeled by these losses. So the pandemic forced me really to allow myself to ask for help and receive that with deep gratitude. I really had no choice. I was sinking. And I'm a professional helper. Learning to receive help came with a huge learning curve for me. But my life is richer for it. So much richer for it now. And as with so many things in life, I wish it hadn't taken 6 decades and a pandemic for me to come to an awareness of this experience. So that's a bit of my story. Now we're going to move on to learn a little bit more about 3 others who found hope for hard times. The first is Stacy, who tells us that hope is a choice. Hope is a choice. Hold on. The next is Krista Tibbett, who describes hope as a muscle. And lastly, you will meet Brian Anderson of the Skano Center in East Belfast, where he describes hope as resilience, hope as a hope as a decision, hope as a muscle, and hope as resilience. Are you with me? Let's go then. This is the Reverend Dr. Stacey Simpson Duke. She is co-pastor of the First Baptist Church of Ann Arbor, Michigan. She is my colleague and friend. She is 41. As you can see, she is mother to twin boys. Yes, they're twins. They're not the same height at all, but they're twin boys. And she is in her 4th year of being actively treated for stage 4 leiomyosarcoma, which is a rare and deadly form of cancer. When she was first diagnosed 4 years ago, she was given 18 months to live. But the doctors didn't know Stacey. She has to be one of the bravest and most courageous people I know. She lives and loves passionately. She knits sweaters, mittens, scarves, gloves. She lives in Michigan. She needs those. She researches everything about her disease and its treatments. She blogs, she supports other people with that disease, and she is still a wife, a mom, and a pastor. And she is in her 4th medical trial. She has suffered so many triumphs and setbacks and horrible side effects. But she persists, daring this disease by living long enough until a better treatment is found. So I think if anyone has the right to say anything about hope, it's Stacey. Here's what she recently wrote in a blog. I'm realistic, but hopeful. Or perhaps I should say, I'm realistic and hopeful. You can be realistic and not be at all hopeful. But you can only be hopeful if you are also realistic. Because hope isn't really hope if a happy outcome is assured. That's confidence, not hope. Hope is a choice you make when you know reality could go otherwise. Hope is a choice. Friends, how do you choose hope? One day at a time. Like everyone in either AA or NA will tell you. And the brain science behind this kind of hoping is real. Science tells us that every time we make a choice like that, we create new neural pathways. So then what seems like a blinding forest becomes a footpath, and then maybe even a road, and it becomes at least more habitual, if not easy, to make that choice. It takes practice. It's a worthy discipline. Hope is a choice. Choose hope. Next, I invite you to know Krista Tibbett. Her program is called On Being. Anyone else a Krista Tibbett fan here? Oh, quite a few of you. Yay, you. Okay. She's, as you know, many of you, an American journalist and author. She's also a theological school graduate. I don't know if you knew that. She went to Yale Divinity. She is the creator of the On Being Project, which is a podcast and blog. She has interviewed the most wonderful, wide-ranging, diverse representation of people across religious spectrums. And if you look at the New York Times, either online or print, you know she was recently featured in an article in the New York Times Magazine just a few weeks ago. She was interviewed by David Marchese. She values openness and she sparks dialogue. She's really curious. And in this interview, which really struck me, she said she thinks of hope as a muscle, not too different from Stacy, but hope as a muscle. And this is what she said in the article in the Times Magazine. I talk about hope being a muscle. It's not wishful thinking or idealism. It's an imaginative leap. It's an imaginative leap. And that's the kind of hope I've seen in people like John Lewis and Jane Goodall. These are people who say, I refuse to accept that the world has to be this way. That is muscular hope. My work, says Krista, is to draw out the voices that need to be heard in this time that generate possibilities. I contrast those with the dysfunction of our time. We can spend our time pointing to what is corrupt and failing, or we can work toward new possibilities. And that takes exercising a muscular hope. I admit I am not always robustly hopeful. But we cannot rush to an answer to our problems. We are called to hold the questions and live into the answers. If you hold a question, you are faithful to it. And then the question will be faithful back to you. That takes muscular hope. Hope is a muscle. Exercise it. Finally, meet Pastor Brian Anderson and the Skeno Center, which is in East Belfast in the Republic of Ireland. Pardon me, in Northern Ireland, its own country. The Republic is the South. Get my Irelands mixed up, sorry. This is a really amazing place. It's a complex of buildings, not just a church. And the complex of buildings house social and outreach services for all the underserved citizens of that working class area of the city. And this was an area of Belfast where the Troubles were very active and prevalent. Pastor Brian leads the worshiping congregation part of this extensive ministry, as well as chairing the board of the agency that oversees the work of all of these varied buildings. You can go there to eat, find an apartment, learn Gaelic, get a job, get counseling for mental health, you name it. In fact, the budget is $2.5 million for their work. But now I show you one of the walls that still separates the Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods of Belfast. If you can see the figures, the bottom of the photograph where all the drawings and images are, you can get a sense. I put that photo up specially so you could see how high the wall is in reference to the size of the figures. They are 32 feet high. Why? Because over the 30 years of the Troubles, they realized it's really hard to throw a Molotov cocktail from the ground and make it go 32 feet over the wall. It's a kind of lesson they learned. from 30 years of warfare. So we asked, I thought it was a relevant question, why 25 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement were the walls still there? Don't you wonder? We did. And there were some furtive looks around the room when that question was asked. And finally, the answer came that, well, they make people there feel more at ease. Because even though 25 years have passed, they feel they're still in the very early stages of peacemaking, genuine peacemaking. The early stages of genuine peacemaking. And Pastor Brian said, unfortunately, there are still paramilitary groups in East Belfast, and they get rowdy, and he called them thugs, and they go around trying to rile up folks. But in addition, one of the things that troubled me is that there are many large painted murals on the sides of buildings, and the messages are very incendiary. I chose not to show you any of those because they have blood dripping on them and stuff like that. It was not appropriate for this venue. And if I lived in Belfast, they would be disconcerting to me. I would not want to see them every time I left my house. But our group was very fortunate to have local guides who had had hands-on experience working in these neighborhoods and with the genuine peacemaking process. So we learned about the historical, territorial, economic, and political dynamics that have shaped this community over 400 years of domination by the British Empire. The religious aspect of the Troubles that gets the most notoriety, at least for my way of thinking, that's what I thought it was mostly about, is really just the icing poured over a cake of many, many ingredients, largely economic. As we were trying to wrap our hearts and minds around this reality, one member of our group said, trying to understand the situation there was like trying to drink from a fire hose. Isn't that an apt analogy? So it is into this really complex milieu that Pastor Brian seeks to minister and bring about genuine peacemaking. And so his message is that hope is resilience. There are forward and backward steps in the midst of hope. And one cannot allow oneself to be dissuaded by temporary losses. You need to take the long view. The long view. The really long view. Because it really seemed, the more we learned about the situation there, the more it seemed to parallel our own country's struggles with racial justice over the last 400 years. Much more than I ever realized. How do you make progress in this environment? Through careful listening, very careful listening. And what they do is listen intently to the community to learn what it feels it needs and wants, not what people from the outside come in and say they should have or what they should need and want. And I think the ease with which the wraparound social services are available, that have been provided based on express needs is beginning to help the residents feel safe, as well as genuinely seen and heard. So trust is beginning to be stitched together. To me, my friends, the Skano Center operates as the church should ideally be. They are in the community, partnering in a multiplicity of ways with a wide variety of social and community organizations in order to be relevant and to meet needs. I was so happy to learn that they provide free courses in learning Gaelic on many levels to help reinforce that the Irish culture need not be lost for folks to live together peaceably. That is a fear of many of the Catholic Irish, that the British Empire influence will override and their Gaelic heritage will be put asunder. The Sunday we were there, Pastor Brian's sermon spoke about the text in the First Testament about Elijah hearing the still small voice. You may be familiar with that text. There's a whirlwind and a fire and all these other loud, crashy things. And finally, the divine appears to be heard in a still small voice. It required careful listening and persistence to hear that voice and to follow its direction. So just like Krista Tibbett encouraged holding the question and living into the answer, and just like Stacy focuses on being realistic and hopeful, peacemaking work holds fast to the notion that genuine peace is possible through a spirit of resilience that is committed to the very long haul. I would like you to revisit with me my opening photo. And now I invite you in these moments, here and via Zoom, to think about, relative to this circle, where are you standing? Where are you standing? Are you outside the circle, kind of giving it the critical eye? Are you contemplating moving in? Maybe tenuously, taking a few footsteps to walk around, seeing both the barriers and the outstretched arms. Or maybe you're ready to stretch out your arms and celebrate how far you've already come, knowing that you are in this for the long haul. Wherever you are, my friends, is where you are, and there is no judgment there. Right? That's what community is, accepting each other where we are. But my word to you today is you can choose hope. You can be realistic and hopeful. You can exercise your hope muscle through open conversation that embraces the questions and lives into the answers. and you can find resilience for this journey. Taking the long view, listening carefully, oh so carefully, to your own needs and those of others. May you find just what you need for hope for hard times. Blessed be.